Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beyond the Script. It is my distinct honor and pleasure to invite our guest today. I have with you Dr. Colin Campbell. He's a biochemistry professor emeritus at Cornell University, and many of you know he's the primary co-author of the China study. And Dr. Campbell and I were both speaking at a virtual event weekend before last in Fairfax, Virginia. And, he called me because we found out that we were speaking on similar topics, and he had found out about some of the clinical work that we were doing with some of our patients with COVID-19 infection. And he shared some very interesting work of his that looked at the antiviral effects or potential antiviral effects of a plant-based diet. And he shared some amazing slides, from the research work that had done. And this is very exciting because we're using a plant-based diet, as I call it, the high antioxidant diet, to treat patients with with viral infections or at risk for viral infections. And so I've shared with many of you over time the theory behind that. And so it's very exciting to hear from Dr. Campbell and hear about his work, which is actual bench work that shows the actual effect. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Dr. Campbell in. Good morning, Dr. Campbell. Thanks for joining us today, and welcome to Beyond the Script.
Looking forward to it.
As we talked a couple of Sundays ago, you were sharing with me the work you had done, some of the bench work you had done. Now, the particular virus at that time, which was HBS virus, right? Tell us about your work and tell us, about some of the findings. I understand you have some slides and some information.
Yeah, Dr. Montgomery, we did. We talked about this, and my story involves both work in the laboratory that I've had for many years at Cornell, but in addition, we also had a big study in China, as you know of, a big comprehensive study, a national survey of diet, lifestyle, and disease characteristics is what we called it. It was a huge study involving a total of, eventually, we did it twice, but eventually involved 8,900 people. So it's a pretty decent sized study in about 170 villages in China and another 32 in Taiwan. So we covered a big waterfront. And at that time, I was aware of some data the Chinese had collected in the 1970s showing that cancer is highly localized geographically in that country, especially rural China. And so we stayed with the rural Chinese counties pretty much, where they basically produce the food that they eat locally, which was important. So local residents and local production of food. So we went there to do that study, and we did it with our Chinese colleagues, of course, and also University of Oxford, where I also have a position over there. And we collected a lot of information, diet, lifestyle, and disease that related to various cancers, of course, as well as other diseases. And it just turns out that we had collected information on some viruses too, not just nutritional factors, but viruses as well. And one in particular, hepatitis B virus, that's a pretty serious one. It causes liver cancer. In fact, many would say that it's the chief cause of liver cancer in parts of the world. So I had a chance to look at the nutritional characteristics related to the presence of that cancer in various parts of the country, together with measuring various characteristics of the virus itself. We measured, for example, the antibody to the virus, that was the prevalence of antibody for the virus among people. We also measured the prevalence of the antigen, that's the active virus. So we had access to two forms of the virus, let's say the active and inactive virus, if you will. So we got some really interesting data on that. That's in the human study. At the same time, we also was able to go back to the lab and have a look to see what effect nutrition really had on the virus-initiated formation of liver cancer in experimental animals. So that combination was was really nice to have all at the same time. We've got some slides, Baxter, on this. Let me pull up this here. And you want me to go into the slides?
Yes, please. That'd be great to share your screens. It's some interesting data. I had the opportunity to look at this, and this is pretty fascinating. Please share your screen.
Yeah, and please interrupt anytime you want. Stop me right mid-sentence if you like. Ask questions, get some clarification, whatever. Okay, so here we go. Let me pull this up here. Okay, my slide is not exactly working very well, I think.
It looks good on my screen.
Okay, just a second here. This technology is amazing, I have to tell you. So anyhow, here is just let's say kind of an overview of the relationship of hepatitis virus with liver cancer, and sort of an outline of some of the stuff we did in that study at that time. This is over 30 years ago, actually, we did this. And so, can you see my cursor on that thing?
Yes.
There? You can.
Yes,
Okay,
I can see it.
Use that, yeah. So anyhow, this is just a little background. If we start up with let me say two things first off. The virus, as far as this infection is concerned, as you well know, I consider there to be two parts of that story. One has to do with the virus coming in, insulting, it's coming into a host, and then the host reacts, it defends itself against the virus. And this happens with all viruses, essentially. And the way that the mammalian hosts, humans in this case, the way the humans react to the virus is to form antibodies, obviously. That's the thing. And antibody formation is part of the whole immune response, to probably the major part. So that's one thing, and that's shared by all viruses.
And I'm glad you pointed that out, because that's a point that I emphasize. It's the antibody response. It's the human response. And as you go through it and show this wonderful information, I want people to keep that in mind. It's just not only the infection going and doing its thing. There's a human response. There's an immune response to that. And I think, when we think about nutrition, we need to think about that part of the equation as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, so we're on the same page on that one. So there's a human response to any of these viruses, and that's what viruses have in common, of course. That's a common feature. But the specificity of different viruses for doing different things, of course, that varies all over the map. Virus can do all kinds of things. In this particular case here, this virus causes liver cancer. So let me show you here on the screen here. Here's a virus, if you will, in the community. Where it is, we don't know, but there's in the community. It comes into the human host, and at first, that person would test positive at that point in time, probably without symptoms. So it's asymptomatic person with the virus. And then eventually that virus now is active, present in the body. It'll do its dirty work and then form liver cancer. That's why I'm trying to show it here.
Yes.
And then,
and let me just make sure our audience clearly understands. So whenever they see the HBsAg, that is the virus itself. Ag stands for antigen, but antigen means the virus or part of the virus, but in this case, it's the virus itself.
Exactly, absolutely. That's the active stuff. So at that point in time, when the human sees that virus, it's got to do something about it. It defends itself by forming antibodies. Here you can see down here on the chart. And so I got that to sort of two-legged scheme here. Either the virus can be inactivated appropriately, or unfortunately, it can remain active and do us damage. So we had in that study in China, I can show you here on the little map on the right, the distribution of cancer across the country. We measure a lot of different nutritional factors as it relate to either the conversion of the antigen to the antibody on one hand, or relating to the relationship of the antigen to the liver cancer itself.
Wow. Yeah, I love this slide, Dr. Campbell, because I love where you put the nutritional factors on the box. You have the arrows, and depending on the type of foods we eat, you can eat certain foods that will push an immune response. That's the arrow going to the left. And the arrow that's angled upward is showing how, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this arrow, there's certain foods you can eat that will then push toward more disease. Exactly. it's not an either, it's really an either or, in the sense that you can nourish the body to improve antibody response, but you can also nourish the body to improve viral response, to suppress the body's immune system, to let the virus have its way, and in this case, potentiate liver cancer.
That's right. You put it well. That little statement I have there on the left, what kind of, seeing this, we can then ask the question, what kind of favors this virus inactivation, essentially? Okay, so let's go down and look at some things here.
Okay.
Now, what I'm showing you here, it's a little complicated, maybe, I hope not, but
looks good.
These what I have here, incidentally, we ended up with a total of 100,000 correlations in that study.
Wow.
It was a huge study. It was the most, New York Times calls it the most comprehensive study ever done in the history of medicine. I think it may still be, I don't know. But in any case, we measure a whole lot of stuff. And so I looked at some of the variables as it related either to the presence of the antigen or the antibody, if you will, as well as the liver cancer, and then only chose those that are statistically significant. So we could focus on that idea. As I said before, we had 8,900 people, adults in this study. These are people aged 35 to 64. So we stayed away from the older age where cause of disease is not very reliable. So anyhow, on the antigen, that's the active virus, that goes up with that arrow there. That goes up when it's directly associated with the formation of liver cancer. And the 3 stars there means 3 degrees of statistical significance. In other words, for statisticians in the crowd, that's 0.001 level of statistical significance.
Wow.
So in other words, the active antigen is highly, highly correlated with the amount of liver cancer that occurs. That's
Gotcha.
Then, but then on the other hand, this is kind of interesting here. The amount of animal protein, I'll return to that a little bit later, but the amount of animal food consumed in rural China is it's only 10% of what we have here in the West.
Wow.
So I really thought that the amount of animal food consumed, there wasn't enough there to be able to detect an effect. So it was surprising to see, not just in this slide, but in some other work that we did, it was surprising to see that when animal protein is first introduced to the diet from almost nothing, so let's say 10% of our average, very low levels, it's associated with the total cholesterol in the blood, as well as the LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, if you will. And so those two factors, the cholesterol fractions, are functions or indicators of animal protein consumption.
Wow.
I don't have all that here, but that's really what it comes down to. And the cholesterol level in China at that time, the range of total cholesterol for these different counties, and this is just the means of counties, it went from 88 to 120 to 170. 88. Wow. The average was 127.
So you can see the impact of a very small amount of animal protein, even at those low levels of cholesterol.
That's right, exactly. A small amount of animal protein is pretty remarkable. It is associated with an increase in cholesterol going up from 88 to whatever, and the average was 127 in China. So
wow.
We never saw that at the time. In those days, the talk was the fact that we shouldn't go lower than 140, 150 because you get some difficulty. And so I went back and we had to analyze the cholesterol levels in 3 different labs, one in London, one in Beijing, and one of my own at Cornell. We got the same results. So wow. I'm confident of these numbers. So anyhow, as total cholesterol goes up, as LDL cholesterol goes up, that's associated with animal protein, which in turn is associated with, if you will, liver cancer here. As I said, that was kind of exciting. My point there is animal protein favors estrogen. Okay, so now I'm going to move to the next one here, having to do with antibodies. I think we'll do that one. Have a look there. Here's the sort of the opposite number. Here's an antibody. As the antibody goes up, that's the inactive virus. That's good stuff. That's associated with total dietary fiber, plant protein, and vegetables. The more vegetables being consumed, that's highly significant, as you see. The more vegetables consumed, the more antibodies.
Wow. Which
stands in contrast over here. You see animal food, if anything, that's smaller animal food. Here, what the antigen goes down when you consume more plant stuff over here.
Yes.
The antigen is going down. You consume more plant food here, the antibody is going up.
So let me so you were able to measure antibody titers. So the more plant foods, the higher the antibody titers.
Yes. Well,
Wow.
in this case here, it was also just prevalence. In other words, detectable antibody at some level amongst 8,900 people.
Wow. Wow. That's important, because now, as you know, we're dealing with the COVID-19 issue, and they're looking at, we're now doing a lot of antibody testing in the clinical setting. And in some cases, they're experimentally looking at the blood of individuals with antibodies to treat seriously ill patients with the COVID-19 virus. And one of the criteria I was looking at, now it's still experimental, but one of the criteria is that they get titers. Okay, so the stronger the antibody production, the more likely they are to use the serum. And so it's interesting that you're able to see an increase in antibody production with an increase in vegetables. So it's almost like a dose effect.
Yeah, it was just fantastic. I mean, those data, again, I'd like to look at the statistical significance. And
Yes.
see there that dietary fiber, that's a 0.01 level probability, if you will. And a kind of study like that to get those kind of correlations is kind of interesting.
Yes.
So, and then in this case slide here, what I'm saying is that plant food favors antibody. Animal food favors antigen. Just really quite clear. Now, let me go to one more. So there's a little quick summary. The antigen is, the antigen tends to be converted to antibody when the plant food is present. And animal food is kind of favoring over here in the active-virus.
Really powerful.
That's really quite exciting, in my view. Now, I want to go to the lab, back to the lab. Let's have something to look there to see what's going on.
Okay.
In a sense, it's almost more exciting. Here is a mouse model where the mouse are transgenic for the virus. So
Okay.
they're transfected with the hepatitis B virus model, if you will. And I'm showing you 4 slides. These histological slides are not the best, but that was done, as I say, 30 some years ago. If I had a chance to do it again, it'd get a little bit clearer. But in any case, I got 4 slides. The one up here, this is the mouse liver. The mouse liver, these are the cells here, in a mouse that has no virus. That's in other words, that's normal. It's a hematoxylin H&E stain. That's a normal slide right there. And then over here, we got 3 slides from animals fed 3 different levels of protein. First off, we got all of these 3 here. Now, these are virus infected.
Gotcha.
So the virus is here. These animals get a low protein. It's only 6% of total protein, and all that protein is being used for a good physiological function. Under those circumstances, we don't get any of that black extrusion. You see the black stuff? That black stuff is an indication of the formation of cancer.
Gotcha.
So down here, you don't see that.
Gotcha.
So here's an animal. Here's an animal exposed to the virus, given low levels of protein. Nothing's happening. No cancer is forming. And on the contrast, if we go from 6% up to 14% protein, medium protein, you start to see some black stuff. And then at 20%, you see a lot.
And this is animal protein in each case, right?
That's right. It's animal protein. So animal protein in all 4 cases. It's just a level of animal protein. When you have something down at low as 6%, that animal protein basically is being used for normal purposes.
Gotcha.
That comes from other studies we did. It's not being used to favor disease production. So
and
yeah.
For our audience, can you give us an idea? It may be a little bit challenging with a diet, but give us an idea in the course of a week or a month or a day, what would 6% protein look like? Animal protein, not that we're encouraging, I recommend 0%, but give the audience some kind of idea of what 6% protein is like.
Well, the way we usually express it, I say nutrition circles, is that we talk about an RDA, or recommended dietary allowance.
Gotcha.
And the RDA for total protein has been set for 75 years, actually. The RDA has been set at around 10% of total calorie intake. 10% of calorie intake has protein. That level is more than adequate. It's plenty of adequate protein to have. But it
Gotcha.
turns out that the majority of our population are consuming somewhere between about 11 and 22.
Huh.
We're above what we need. And all of that extra protein is, for the most part, is coming from animal food.
Gotcha.
In fact, on average, of the total protein that we consume as a nation, the percent of our total protein in the form of animal protein is around 75%. So we are, as a society, we are consuming a diet high in protein, total protein, most of which is really coming from animal foods. Okay.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
But let me take that comment just one step further. Namely that plants provide all the protein we need. We do not need to get, I mean, plants can have protein also up to 15, 20% maybe sometimes. But that's no problem because we're eating it as whole food.
Gotcha.
And nature's made that's perfect. It's great. But when we're consuming it as animal food and on the process decrease in plant food, then we get up pretty high. So I'm basically, I wish I had a chart here. I don't think I have that. No. Well, in any case, the amount of protein we need is 10% of total. A lot of people don't know that 10% figure. They want to know grams.
Yep.
You know, and unfortunately, there's a little bit technical issues there trying to translate it that way. But in any case, it's best expressed as percent of total protein.
Gotcha.
So total protein is 10% of total, I mean, 10% of total calories.
Yes.
Yeah, percent of total calories. So 10% of total calories as protein is ideal.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And then the ideal protein being a plant protein.
That's right. And so it should be all plant protein, actually. As soon as you start putting in animal food into the diet, then the total protein is going to start going up because animal food is pretty rich in protein. So you get a higher level of total protein. But this result here, I also have this actually another way. I'm showing the slides here, but we also measured the so-called messenger RNA to give it quantitation.
Yes.
And I don't have that slide here, but it turns out that the amount of RNA that's formed that gives rise to the protein that gives rise to the cancer, it was a remarkable difference. The protein had just a really, really strong effect. In other words, the cancer doesn't form unless the animal protein is high enough.
Wow.
And anything that goes over what plants can provide, we got problems. That's what it comes down to.
Wow. So you're talking to the messenger RNA, you're talking about gene expression, really.
That's right, exactly.
And so the animal protein is turning on.
That's right.
It's expressing the genetic predisposition to liver cancer.
Absolutely. And that translates into the protein we see of the black stuff coming out here in the form of cancer. So animal protein is a very strong effector of liver protein production. So now with that little background, let me go to the next slide to try to summarize the human study with the animal study. In this case here, and I'm stuck in there, the COVID-19 thing. I'll come back to that in a moment. If this were to apply to COVID-19, and I'm going to suggest it does, even though we haven't done a study on this. I'm careful how I say this. We haven't done a proper study on this, but I'm going to say it does apply to COVID-19 based on the following argument. Here's the same scheme here. Here we got the COVID-19 antigen theory. We get exposed to it, and we can test positive for the COVID-19, but we don't see symptoms. So now we got asymptomatic COVID positive individuals. They can then go on and form and the dirty work with what it does, the lung functions and all that problem that we have. It can go do that, or that virus can be inactivated in the form of antibodies. So here's what really happens. The whole food plant-based diet, which is no animal protein, of course, all plants, it actually blocks the production of the antigen, the antibody. That comes from the animal study I just showed you. There's no protein there, no animal protein. It blocks it. At the same time, the whole food plant-based diet from the China study, the human study, excuse me, the China study, I'm sorry, the plant-based people, they're eating more of the whole plant-based foods, they're forming antibody. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. So when we're eating animal food, we're going to get a lot of antigen, a lot of liver cancer in the liver cancer case, or in the case of the COVID-19, we're going to get the symptoms.
Yes, yes.
These are people going to get sick and die over here eating animal food.
So this is fascinating. So this, as I'm listening to you present this, a couple of key questions come to mind because, as you know, we're doing antibody testing. So I'm going to ask you a question along the lines of hypothetical, because it seems like this could be a dynamic process. What I mean is the following. So let's say I've got 10 people and they've all been exposed to the virus. They all successfully suppress the viral infection and they create antibodies.
Okay.
I take that population of 10 people and I give 5 of them an animal rich diet. Let's say 100, 50 and 50. So I give 50 of them an animal protein rich diet, and the other 50 I put on a strict plant-based diet.
Right.
Then I remeasure the antibodies. So at baseline, I get the antibodies. They're all eating the same regular diet and they all form antibodies. And I measure antibodies and measure titers. But then I put one group half on a heavy animal protein diet and the other half on a heavy plant-based diet, 100%. And then maybe after 30 days or 90 days or 100 days, I remeasure antibody titers. Do you think the antibody titer in the plant-based group would be higher than in the animal group? And if so, why do you think that?
Well, let me back up on one thing. At the beginning, if I understood you correctly, I'm not sure you meant it this way, but you were saying you were starting out with 100 people, all of whom have antibodies.
Yeah, so they all 100 people who were antibody positive, they were all successfully infected but suppressed the infection.
You mean they're all antigen positive?
Well, antigen positive, but also I want to
antibody.
Yeah, I want to take it a step further. They become antigen positive, they get infected, and they all mount a successful immune response. So I'm going to give them, I'm going to put them in the direction of a successful immune response. So,
Right, okay.
and the point I'm getting at is the following. So there are a lot of people who are eating a standard American diet who mount a successful antibody response. So they fight the virus successfully. They either minimally symptomatic or asymptomatic. So they go through it, they get the antigen, they get infected, they successfully kill the virus and mount an antibody response. Now, the next question I'm getting at is what is their titers? So in other words, if I give them a plant-based diet, even after they've successfully defeated the infection, can a plant-based diet improve their antibody formation and improve the duration of their resistance to the antibodies? See, the question now is that people who get the infection, mount antibody response, how long will they have immunity? Is it 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? So the question is, and one could argue that, well, the stronger your antibody response, perhaps the stronger your immunity. So the question I'm asking is this: can I potentiate a plant-based diet and improve the longevity of immunity? So it's a different question. The one question is, you give them a plant-based diet to improve antibody response once they get the antigen, once they get infected. So that's understood. The question I'm asking is, after they've gotten infection and they've mounted the successful antibody response, can I improve that antibody response over time and therefore improve their longevity? So in other words, what I'm asking is, will people on a plant-based diet who have an antibody response have a longer duration of immunity than people not on a plant-based diet?
That's a really interesting question. I hadn't thought of it quite that way, but it's really interesting. Let me reframe it a little bit. If you start out with all these people all have an antibody, right? The titer is high enough. Okay, let's say they're all immune at that point.
Yes.
You follow along with your argument, you're then making the presumption that some of those people with the antibody might revert. If they are put on an animal food diet, they might revert, correct? Or they may have a low titer.
Exactly. They may revert or a low titer.
Yeah. Okay. So they got a low titer, and so they're put on animal food, and then yes, I would say yes, they're likely to get the response. Okay.
Yes.
Let me twist it around just a little bit. It's a really interesting way you put it, but let's start out with the same 100 people. Okay. They're all positive with the antigen. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. They're asymptomatic, positive with the antigen at that point in time. you put one, and I don't know what their diet was prior to that, let's say, whatever it was.
Yeah.
But in any case, at that point in time, you put 50 of them on a strict plant-based diet.
Mhm.
I'm going to suggest in theory, those people they've got the virus there already, that's going to convert into an antibody. The antigen that's present there is going to convert to an antibody. In contrast, the ones who are there with the antigen, that's going to go down the wrong path. They're going to get the response, right? They're
Yes.
symptomatic. Here's the question, and it's really interesting looking at some of the data coming out of the COVID experience these days. You know, we are generally assuming, at least the public is sort of assuming, I think some of the people talking about this, assuming that once you get antibodies, you know, you're immune. But
Yes.
we don't know how long. You know, we don't know how long that's going to last. And there's some evidence that people who are first found to be immune, if you will, antibodies, they're unfortunately, some of them are reverting. So the immune response is not lasting very long, which is your point.
Exactly. That's the nature of the question.
Yeah, so they're reverting. And so now they're susceptible. If they're on animal food, they're really reverting. Then all of a sudden they're in trouble.
Hey, I think that's a very important question. That's an experiment we can run. In fact, I'm looking at possibly doing that here.
Yeah, so that's exactly the point. If you keep them on the plant, and this is another point. We can't use nutrition like a drug. Like, okay, we're going to treat this week, and then, okay, you're off, go back to what you want to do. That's not the story here. Once they start this diet, they got to stay with it.
I agree.
That's the issue.
Well, I mean, but Dr. Campbell, I remember from the China study, you showed experiments that you were able to turn cancer on and off by increasing and decreasing amount of animal protein.
Right.
And we have in our clinical data, we put people on a detox regimen, an aggressive plant-based diet, and we can show changes that if they go off, they can revert. So I agree, it's not a drug in the classic sense, but there's I mean, even in the data here, the more plants, the more response. Right. That to some extent is almost a dose-like effect. The more aggressive, the body responds to aggressive nutrition, 100%, a longer duration. But it would be interesting to look at, and maybe we need to sidebar one day, look at a group, because we're going to start doing antibody testing in my lab, in my clinic. And we're going to look at it, and I need to check with the lab and see if they can get antigen, do the serology, the quantitative, because we need to do a baseline quantity. Somebody's positive, I need to know more than that positive. I need to know what the baseline, serology, the quantity of antibody. And then we get an after based on what they do on their diet.
That's a really good point. And as you're organizing this kind of study, you got two things to look at. One is you're talking about dose or titer on the one hand, as opposed to the diet on the other. And so the animal consumption, animal food consumption amongst the people with low titer, they may be in trouble.
Yes, exactly. Low titer. And see, this is an important question as it relates to the COVID-19 infection, because the experts are saying we don't know how long immunity will last. And the answer is we don't know. But I think the real answer is that it depends. It depends on the immune response and the strength of the person's immune system.
Yes, of course. Of course. That's a really important point. That's a really important point. I think, by the way, the ones who are reverting back to it, becoming symptomatic after their formulation antibodies, those people probably don't have a very high titer.
Right.
That's one explanation. The other explanation is those people also are probably consuming a lot of animal food in according to this idea here.
I believe so. And they're on the border in terms of, they're probably just barely well enough from a nutritional and biochemical physiological standpoint to form antibodies to suppress illness initially, but they're kind of teetering. And so their diet may tip them back over to convert to an ill state where they get more infection. So with this teetering may be just due to what we're putting in our system. And we see this with other diseases. I have a patient with heart failure. We come and put them on a nutritional regimen detox, the ejection fraction improves. And then they revert back to the bad diet, the ejection fraction goes back. I mean, it's a teetering back and forth, and disease states are very similar.
Yeah, and that's what we saw in our animal studies, as you mentioned before. We could turn cancer on and off, fairly late stages. That's exactly what was shown.
And similarly, you can turn viral infections on and off.
Exactly. You turn viral infection on and off, which incidentally goes to a much larger point that I think both of us would probably agree to.
Uh-huh.
Namely, the food we eat needs to be consumed all the time, not part of the time.
Agreed.
Okay. And if we don't do it that way, we come on and off and stuff like that, we're asking for trouble. And we're going to get into the kind of trouble that raises big questions, like we're going to increase cost of health care by doing the wrong thing. They get sick, and then we're going to feed the system.
Yep.
Or and of course, the whole idea about food and environment, we know about that now too. We're pushing the idea that we're eating the wrong kind of food that's creating some of the climate change, for starters.
Yes.
So here's my argument on all of that when you put it all together. We need to get onto the plant-based diet and stay there.
I agree.
It's a healthy diet, not just for this. Oh, one more thing. I just happened to think of this. As you know, this is true. The COVID people who are experiencing the sickness and actually dying, the majority of those people are over 60 years of age.
Yes.
95%, according to Italian data and study and also the data of New York City, they were suggesting that like 95 to 99% of these people who are really suffering, they are compromised by bad nutrition.
That's right.
And the bad nutrition coming from the fact they're eating the typical Western diet.
That's right.
So
and they all have comorbidities, which we know are linked to poor nutrition.
Exactly. They got comorbidities and linked to the whole thing. So I was thinking of something else too. So for the older folks who are actually suffering most of this problem, they really need to, I know, here's another point I wanted to make. Basically, the dietary effect, it can occur very rapidly according to some of the data we now have. You must see this in your clinic. In fact, you probably got some data on this point. Let me say what my impression is based on some other thing. You tell me if you see this. You put people on a plant-based diet, their cholesterol can begin to drop within days.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes, that's right.
One more thing. You take a type 2 diabetic, they're on insulin and so forth. You put them on that their requirement for the insulin changes so fast that if you don't take care of it, they get in trouble within a day or two.
Well, I'll tell you what we do is once we start them on our detox regimen, we stop the insulin immediately. We stop it at the very beginning.
Okay.
I err on to have them run high because it's dangerous when they put them on a plant-based diet and they're on insulin. So I agree with you.
Right. Well, see here's the bottom line. I'm happy to hear you're doing that. It's interesting. But here's the point that what it really is telling us, the dietary effect is rapid. Much more rapid than a lot of people are realizing.
Absolutely.
So now come back to the COVID situation again.
Okay.
You got people, they're tested positive. They're not necessarily going to form symptoms, or if they do form symptoms, it might be kind of mild. But the point is, as soon as they know they're positive, which they always don't know, but they can take some hope in the fact that if they switch their diet, they're going to immediately begin to mediate the response that they might be getting.
That's exactly right. And I think the point you make about other diseases changing in days, diabetes and high blood pressure and heart failure, I think my theory is that you can probably see an antibody titer change within days to weeks. And that's why we're going to look at doing this. I need to look at the lab that we're working with to see if they can give us accurate titer measurements, because we're going to start looking at this, and we'll probably get information within a matter of a few weeks. Just by putting a certain group of people on a detox and certain group of people following a regular diet.
Well, I think based on what you said and what I'm thinking too, you're going to see things. It's going to be quicker than a few weeks.
I think so. I think we can, and I think it'd be worth taking a look, because this would be very impactful, because this data needs to reach the broader community, because the whole issue is long-term immunity.
That's right.
So if you can show just by nutritional intervention, you can improve long-term immunity, then this will have a big impact on what our recommendations would be.
Absolutely. There's one other angle to throw in here, one other idea, I think, and that is, the virus, let's say you've got a bunch of virus centers all active, and now they're forming antibodies. that doesn't prove the point that some viruses are kind of hanging around, a bit resistant. They're hanging around and maybe hanging around for a while. If you don't stay with the diet, they're going to start acting up too.
Oh, agreed. I agree with that. Yes, no, I agree with you 100%. I just want to show a correlation in a short period of time of an increased titer associated with diet. That'd be step one. I agree with you 100%. Typically what we have to do is show people the first part and say, okay, there's a correlation here. Getting the psychological, get them to get over the psychological barrier of staying on a plant-based diet long term is a process over time, is what we use in our clinic. But what we do, and what I like about the detox regimen, I say, okay, give me a finite period of time. I'm going to show you some clinical improvement. And so once they see that clinical improvement, of course, a lot of people, for various reasons, digress, go back to their previous diet. But what sticks with them is the fact that I had a major and clinical improvement that I never had before when I went to this regimen. And so oftentimes they come back, and then we work with them over a long-term benefit.
Right. Yeah, this is a good argument for, keeping your patients, on the deal.
Absolutely.
I have another slide here. Let me show you this here.
Sure.
Just mentioned before. These are individuals most susceptible to COVID-19, let's say, 60 years in age and above. Okay. So when these folks who are now infected, let's say, they do go on a whole food plant-based diet, they're reversing degenerative disease, which gives rise to the comorbidities. You can see there by the arrows.
Yes, I see that.
And so it's blocking both that and blocking that.
Yep. And see, the degenerative diseases, I had it where I show individuals the immune system, when you consume poor, bad food, or you have a poor, nutritious dietary lifestyle, it increases the number of free radicals, and you walk around or you live in an oxidative state.
Right.
And so that oxidative state wears down your cardiovascular system, your endocrine system, as well as your immune system. So, somebody with heart failure, kidney failure also has immune system failure, if you like them. It's to compartmentalize it. The body is much more complex than that. And so we think of kidney failure disease or heart disease or hypertension, but we don't think of immune system dysfunction or immune system disease. And that's part of that degenerative disease box that you have there. And that's what predisposes into the viral infection.
This conversation is really interesting. What you're saying here, the production of free radicals, of course, we know that's a problem. It's got to be kept under control. I mean, free radicals have their place in biochemistry, attacking pathogens and that sort of thing.
Exactly.
But it's got to be kept under control.
Has to be balanced.
Yeah, it's got to be balanced. And so it gets out of hand at times. And when it gets out of hand, that's when you're seeing your cardiovascular problems. And you're seeing cancer, by the way, tends to be advanced under the circumstances. And we actually, some years ago, now 30 years ago also, we did some research with experimental animals on this particular point. The higher protein diet, by the way, decreases the body's normal ability to produce natural killer cells.
Wow.
That was really dramatic. And natural killer cells are operating in part because of their availability of using free radicals as their tools to kill.
So let me make sure I'm clear. So the consumption of animal protein decrease the body's ability to produce natural killer cells.
Exactly.
Wow. That's very pertinent to this conversation. That's part of it.
It's part of
that data.
Well, there's one more. Let me add one more part to it too. This goes back to now I've got 40, 50 years of my own life. In terms of, one of the chief sources of free radicals, excessive free radicals. One of the chief sources is the enzyme called mixed function oxidase.
Okay.
It's in the liver. It's a detox kind of enzyme. That enzyme, as it's oxidized, and let's say carcinogens and that sort of thing, it spills over and creates free radicals. That will increase dramatically within 24 hours as soon as you start feeding more animal protein. The animal protein increases that enzyme activity up to 6-fold.
Wow.
That is the source. That is one of the major sources of free radical production. It's really interesting.
Wow, that's impressive.
That basically was turned on to cancer.
Wow, that's impressive. This is amazing. I tell you, this is, Dr. Campbell, I really appreciate you coming on our show. You can actually reverse your share screen. I want to share a few comments before we close out today. But this is a very, very impressive data. I remember looking at the slides, but here you present the data really brings it alive. And I was really, fascinated with this. And this is, it's got my wheels churning. And I want to continue this conversation. As I alluded to, we're going to start to look at this in our clinical population. We're going to start doing antibody testing, but I'm going to talk to our lab because I think we definitely need to look at titers. It's not enough to say, yes, you have antibodies or no, you have antibodies. We need to look at titers. And then we need to say, okay, if somebody has antibodies and low titers, what can we do or what can be done to improve their titers? Because one can make the argument that the higher your titers, the longer and stronger your immunity to this virus. So if we can at least show a correlation with something as simple as a plant-based diet increasing their titers, then that would be an important first step to saying, hey, we need to start to look at this from a clinical standpoint and see long-term who stays, infection-free or who has a long immunity, et cetera.
Absolutely. And let me extend that one more step beyond what you just said. We get the different viruses. Viruses are always appearing on the scene all the time. We know that.
Yes.
It's part of our life cycle somehow. But these viruses basically come up from additional mutations, if you will. Mm-hmm. This the corona, the 19 is going to be corona 20 or whatever. We're throwing another mutation in there, we might get God knows what we're going to get. But that's why, and under those circumstances, to eat this way, the whole food plant-based diet, it'll take care of any future. My argument is going to be taking care of any future kinds of mutations that may occur.
I agree with you 100% because the body's immune system has a way to adjust and adapt in a way that we can't with vaccines.
Right.
And I don't want to get into that argument. Vaccines are another issue, but the point is the body's immune system has its own natural vaccine.
I'd be happy to get in a discussion with you about the whole vaccine idea, but
Okay, I've got it. Okay, your audience, y'all have heard that. Dr. Campbell has agreed to come back and talk about vaccines. I do want to discuss that with you in the future.
Yeah, let me say one more thing. Here we're talking about a nutritional solution to a medical problem, of course, in this case, as opposed to hanging around waiting to get some chemical to kill the disease, right?
That's right.
That's a pharmacologic approach.
Yes.
And that chemical, once they develop, we know drugs have side effects.
Yes.
And number one. Number two, the body begins to tolerate them, so you need higher doses or you need another drug to counter the side effects. The whole paradigm. So we're resting our case on using new chemicals to come along to solve the problem, and or developing a vaccine, which takes another year or two, whatever it takes. Yes, and that vaccine is going to be fairly specific for the current virus we're examining.
Yes.
But not necessarily going to deal with a new mutant variant.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So that's what makes vaccines ineffective.
That's right. Exactly. That's what, when you said that, that's what I wanted. I knew that you would probably agree. So, these two ideas, of use on a nutritional perspective, which can last forever, more or less, I hope.
Yes.
As opposed to the drug or vaccine solutions, which are problematic, big time.
Yep. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Well, Dr. Campbell, this has been a real treat. I really thank you for coming on. And I've learned a lot here, and I hope our audience has learned a lot. And I'm going to share this with our group and get this message around. But this has been really helpful. And again, I hope this is the beginning of a continued conversation. I will sidebar you on some of the things we plan to do in our clinical setting. I'm going to look at titers, and we're actually going to look at individuals on titers and see if we can improve their titers. So I think that's an important question to ask and answer. And then maybe some other things that we can do as well. So I'll definitely keep you on the loop on that, and perhaps we can team up with some of our data and work on some publications. But I think this is going to be very helpful to our audience. Again, thank you again for joining us, and I look forward to visiting with you again in the near future to discuss the immune system, viral infections, and maybe have a more in-depth discussion on vaccines because I think that's an important discussion to be had as well.
But by the way, I don't know whether you're recording this or are you or
Yeah,
not?
we're live on YouTube.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you a favor. I want to be able to have this here and share it with also my community, the Center for Nutrition Studies, CNS.
Yes, I'll get this to you. This conversation, I'll make sure we get it to you.
I want to send it out to them, and another community we have is about 250,000 people.
Wow. I'll see you the link to the video. That'd be perfect. Yes, please do.
That's for the so-called pod network. I don't really know about that or not. We got to.
Yes.
Okay. Well, in any case, we got a couple of big communities here. And,
good.
And we've had a good conversation. I really enjoyed this fantastically.
Now, this is fascinating, but it's only the beginning.
Yeah, but I want to take this here. Well, suggest to show it to the two communities. We'll talk again too, on some other things.
Yes, I'll do that. I'll get the link to you, but I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, take care. Have a good one.